Hi, and welcome to 12 Questions Memphis. This is our Sunday night, 8 o'clock session. If you're able to listen to us at 7, we had a great discussion of suffering, which could have gone on for another hour. You had some great questions and comments online that I wish we could have got even more to. Hopefully we can get to some of those in some other ways. We're trying to answer the top 12 question types that people gave us. We asked everybody, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? And we had our little list when we began of questions that we thought people would ask, but there were a few that surprised us that we didn't expect. And this is one of the ones that surprised us, that we didn't expect to be in that top 12. Does God choose one nation over another? We had people ask questions like, is America God's chosen nation? Do Christians believe that America is God's chosen nation? What should be the Christian relationship to our country? And so tonight we've asked Dr. Ralph Gilmore to talk to us and get our conversation started about some of those things. If you're watching online, again, we want to hear your thoughts. It's scrolling at the bottom of the screen. It will be the ways you can reach out to us through text and through Twitter, through Facebook, through email. We also have an Instagram account. And also you all that are here, we want to hear your thoughts too, especially after he speaks for about 25 minutes. There will be that 2 or 3 minute break. If you hadn't sent in a thought or a question, that's a perfect time to do it. Pull out your phone and go ahead and get that ready. Go ahead, however you want to do it, email, Twitter, whatever. Get that up and ready, and we want to hear your thoughts. So Dr. Ralph Gilmore's got a PhD in philosophy. He's a college professor. He's a preacher, and we're looking forward to him leading our thoughts on this question. Does God choose one nation over another? We're going to watch a video, and then Dr. Gilmore will speak to us.
A question for you. Is America God's chosen nation? It seems that some countries are better off than others. What makes us so special? Why do we have money while others live in poverty? Why do we have peace at home while others live in war? Why do we have, well, everything? If God is so good, then why does He play favorites? Are we really the Christian nation that many think we are? Does God choose one nation over another?
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I hope everything's working well with the microphone. I'm in a peculiar situation about this. First of all, I love my country, and I'm sure that if you're an American, that you love this country as well. Last week we were in the Virgin Islands, which is a U.S. territory, and asked several people who were there, how do you feel about the United States? And I didn't get any negative answers. It could be that they were giving me the answer they thought I wanted, but I did ask them some. Because if you hadn't heard the earlier story, it wasn't because I was just there, but we were there for a medical reason, so I got a chance to talk to some people. So let's talk about whether or not God will bless America. And if indeed it is that the United States is God's chosen people, etc. And this is unusual. I've preached on things similar to this before, but since this question is one of those questions, let's see, we may have to come up with another battery or something for this because I'm not getting any response. Okay, so is God red, white, and blue? And if you were to ask the average American, do you think that the United States is going in a negative moral direction, a neutral moral direction, or a positive moral direction? The answer is overwhelmingly, they think we're going in a negative moral direction. Now, I'm not intending, nor will I allow this to be a discussion necessarily about LGBT or the Supreme Court or current decisions like that, although some of the questions will involve those sorts of things, because I'm pretty sure that's why this came up. In other words, if you're happy with our country, then there's a strong sense of nationalism and everybody's okay. But if you're not happy with the direction of our country, then people start asking questions about, well, what's going to happen to us in the United States? And can God tarry long if He sees these things happening to us? And will the same thing happen to us that happened to other nations that were under judgment of God in the Old Testament, etc.? So I suppose that the situation helped to cause the question to come up, and so let's talk about it. All right, first of all, let's apply this to America. God bless America. Is it wrong to talk about God blessing America? And if indeed God does bless America, are we saying that in some sort of an exclusive way? Meaning, do we intend for God to bless America in some way that God would not, for instance, bless the countries of Africa? That God would not bless the European nations? That God would not bless other people that need Him so much? And the answer should be, of course not. We are not saying that, nor should we ever have said that, but it's easy for us to drift into this idea that somehow or another God has had His eye of providence on America all along, and therefore that's given us the idea that we are a Christian nation per se. Now, all right, so let's go further here. Let's talk about the patriarchal age and the Mosaical age and the Christian age, because I want to talk about the relationship of church and state. With regard to that, that would mean how close should the church get to the state, how close should the state get to the church, etc. It was Thomas Jefferson himself who thought that there should be a one-way wall between church and state. He never thought that they should be alienated. But Thomas Jefferson felt that it would be the principles of good religion that would help the state to go in the direction that it went. I mean, after all, did he not say in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are, finish that with me please, created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Therefore, I guess I'm not surprised that on the internet this last week, there are some people who have been calling for the sandblasting of those words in Washington wherever they appear. Because they are so strong about the separation of church and state, they don't even like what Jefferson said. By the way, Jefferson was a deist. And he was not a Christian in the sense in which you and I understand him to be, but he did believe in God. However, he was a French deist because he was also minister to France in 1791 or so. So that gave him the background of writing the Declaration of Independence. The ideas are pretty much the same as when he was minister of France. So, what about church and state? Well, God, first of all, spoke to the fathers by the prophets, right? All right, the fathers would be all the fathers from Adam to Noah, and from Noah to Abraham. That would be 20 of them that are mentioned in the book of Genesis. Therefore, we sometimes call this the patriarchal age. These are Tisdall's charts. Nobody probably would know Maurice Tisdall, but even though he's passed on, I want people to remember the man who originally did these charts, and his name was Maurice Tisdall. All right, so we got three circles here. God spoke to the fathers, and then there was the time that the law of Moses was in effect. And then there's that third circle over here, which is the Christian age. So it's the patriarchal age, the Mosaical age, and the Christian age, which represent the entirety of human history on this earth. As we think about that, let's zoom in now. God gave the promised land to Abraham in Genesis 12 through 15. He gave it to, did we jump ahead too far? I want to back up a little bit, and I'm not hitting the button, but we're just going forward here. Okay, and then he promised it to Isaac in Genesis 26 and to Jacob in Genesis 46. So the question then is that same land promise available? Is it still going on now? Is it a perpetual land promise that God gave to the Jews so that now they are still and can be called the Holy Land? By the way, I don't call it the Holy Land. If I'm taking a group to Israel, I say we're going to Israel. Or I say we're going to the Bible lands. But I do not say Holy Land unless I forget, which is possible because I am AARP. But nonetheless, I don't usually say Holy Land. Why? Because it leaves the implication that the land is still holy. And because of that, somehow or another, the last time we were in Israel, we were standing around this random place outside of Jerusalem where there's this footprint. It's not really a footprint, but indentation of the rock. It's about that big. Let me just tell you, and they think that Jesus left his footprint as he ascended into heaven. And I'm kind of thinking, if that's his footprint, he had a foot bigger than Shaquille O'Neal. Okay, I'm just telling you that he had and what were people doing? They were surrounding this place, lighting candles, saying, this is holy ground. Well, gag-a-maggot. I'm kind of thinking there is no way, can I say that? Okay, all right, so there is no way that this is holy ground. And besides that, that ain't Jesus' footprint. All right, so whenever you're talking about this, is it indeed holy land? And I'm thinking, Well, it was the place where holy things happened, but notice what we see next here. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All, back up please, all came to pass. That's in Joshua 21:45. Notice that Joshua says that all of the promises that God gave through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of them had been fulfilled. Well, then why is there still fighting in Israel? Because there are competing rights of who owns that land, and they are both supposedly divine rights. The Muslims think that that Allah has given them that place because of the Quran. Therefore, they think that is their land. And the Jews think that it is still land that God, Yahweh, gave to them because of these passages. But now notice, Joshua says, this is past history. God fulfilled those land promises. So if God fulfilled those land promises, there's a long chart on this, and you may not be able to see it. But what I found actually on the internet, back up please, I'm not touching this. Okay, all right. So what we see here is that number one, the promise that God made to Abraham is that you'll be a great nation, right? Number two, He promised him land. You know, look to the east, look to the west, north, south, etc. And then number three, He promised him seed. In other words, He promised him prosperity and posterity. He promised him posterity in that you're going to have a lot of kids. He promised him prosperity in that Abraham really, really was a rich man. So when we think about that, we see in various places in the book of Genesis how reference is made to these three aspects of the promise that God made with him. Okay, so let's go further now. All right, so let's zoom in on this period of time now, and let's see about church and state. Under the patriarchal age, I am not touching this, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have to stomp it. Okay, all right, so let us back up, please. Okay, let us back up. Under the patriarchal age, there was the apparent combination of church and state. In other words, there was no separation of church and state because the church of Israel and the state of Israel are the same thing in the Garden of Eden. Besides that, there's no Israel yet. Because Israel is Jacob. All right, so in Adam and Eve, what do you have? God said, pretty simple, you can eat whatever is here, but the day in which, you can finish that, can't you? You eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. There is no separation of church and state. They both are the same. If you read Exodus and if you read Deuteronomy, second law, you will find out there's no clear-cut division between what happens in church and what happens in civil matters. It is not clearly delineated in Exodus or Deuteronomy. Therefore, the church of Israel and the state of Israel are the same. Now, next, what about the period of time of Moses? Well, back up please. Under the Mosaical age, there was no clearly definable laws addressed to church and state. The Ten Commandments, for instance, are indeed there. But in the Ten Commandments, you have some things that appear to be directly about worship. You know, don't say bad things about God and remember Him and keep Him holy. And by the way, love your mother and daddy. You know, and all that's kind of thrown in there together. Don't kill, don't steal, don't, as one student said at Freed Hardeman on a test when James Tollerson was there, he couldn't exactly remember the Ten Commandments correctly, but he said, don't kill, don't steal, do not admit adultery. Okay, now that's not exactly the way that it was there. And by the way, there's a recent religious leader who wants to rewrite, I'm serious about this, he wants to rewrite some of the Ten Commandments because he doesn't think they are the way that God would have them to be in the 21st century. So, I'm kind of thinking, don't go there. All right, so anyway, there was no clear-cut distinction, but now what? Under the Christian age, you're supposed to be able to read that better. That's supposed to be black print. Under the Christian age, we see the circle is incomplete, meaning this is where we live now. And this is the way that it's going to be until Jesus comes back. That's going to be the law that we live under. We live under the law of Christ. Now, what about church and state now? Well, now, Jesus says it's okay to separate church and state. Yes, He does. In Matthew 22, Jesus taught with the denarius that's inside the fish's mouth. He said, render to Caesar, finish that with me please, the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Some of you might remember when Jesus stood before Pilate, He did not stand there as a political king. He did not stand there with His mighty armies. He said, if I were such a king, then my servants would be fighting you now and you would be a lot busier. But instead, He said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight. I am not opposed to the separation of church and state per se, because Jesus taught the difference. Now, during the time that they were the same, that was in preparation for the Messianic age. It was in preparation for the setting up of the kingdom in Acts chapter 2. And therefore, the preservation of Israel was very important in order that Jesus would come through the tribe of Judah. But when the Messiah has done that, as far as I can see, that ended God's interest in geography. God does not have any preferential interest in geography anymore. Well, why do we sometimes think that we are the favored nation here? Because most members of the churches of Christ, at least those that we can count, are in the United States. Not only that, most of them in the southern United States. And therefore people think, well, that must mean that God is blessing that land. Nope, doesn't necessarily mean that at all, but God does bless His people wherever they are. And besides that, it used to be true, I suppose it still is, that if you really want to go to the place where there are more members of the churches of Christ per capita, then go to Nigeria. In parts of Nigeria, the number of members of the churches of Christ is greater than it is in the United States. So whenever we think about now what does God want, I don't think Jesus is disturbed about the separation of church and state. I think that's the way that He wants it. He doesn't want the church to be in charge of government. He does not want a theocracy where, the elders are in charge of the country. He does not want that at all. So the problem is not the separation of church and state. The problem is, how are you going to interpret the separation? In 1897 or so, the U.S. Supreme Court talked about the separation of church and state in a way that pretty much allowed them to be separate, but the church could still have influence on the state. In other words, God could still be the basis of laws that were made in this country. Now, then 1963 came along. 1963 is the year that the Supreme Court reinterpreted the separation of church and state, which some have called now the alienation of church and state, because now the church can do nothing whatsoever to influence the laws, theoretically, that are made by the state. And that has caused some of our problems. How many of your school teachers, hands up? Okay, let's say that you say to your students, now don't hit and don't gouge. Sit down, be respectful, and be a good citizen. In other words, stuff you should have learned in kindergarten, right? And your kids may do that, or they may challenge you, and they may say, now why must I do that? Well, what you can't say is, well, because God wants you to. Now, if they bring up a question about God as a school teacher, you are allowed to answer it, but you cannot make God part of the curriculum, and therefore, part of your problems as school teachers is that everybody's asking you to control the kids better, but you don't have a way to determine what's right and wrong without reference to God. And there's our dilemma in this country that has developed so much of the separation of church and state. Like one of our highest political leaders recently saying, well, what churches need to do is just change their mind on this. Now, let me get this straight. We believe the Bible's first, and you're just telling us to change our mind on this? And exactly what's going to happen. That causes anger from those who are aware of the fact that it is religious freedom that caused a lot of people to get on those ships from Europe. And they came to this country. Some were Quakers, some were other religions, but they were trying to escape what they felt was an intolerant situation in Europe, or else they would not have gotten on the boat. And they came here because of religious freedom. So, is it true that church and state are supposed to remain separate according to Jesus? Yes, but what does that mean? Well, one possibility is, okay, the church needs to change the state, but there doesn't need to be anything direct or intentional about it. In other words, you become a Christian, you're going to be a better citizen because you became a Christian. But there's nothing intentional about it. Therefore, one level, notice here that church and state don't have anything to do with each other, but one level, it's called the ethics of character, would be indirect and unintentional. In other words, yeah, the church should be the light and salt, and when people are light and salt, they're going to change the culture, and that's the extent of their political involvement. Well, let's get a little bit more politically involved here, and let's say, okay, I admit that our politics are all messed up, and because of that, we do need to have an intentional influence, but it's still going to be indirect. Now, there's going to be nobody saying you got to vote for so-and-so. There's going to be nobody saying that you're a sinner if you vote so-and-so. But nonetheless, the elders might, for instance, leave out in the foyer maybe a list of what the political candidates believe on certain issues. And you pick up that list and you make your own choice. That would be intentional. The elders intentionally are giving you information, but the elders or the preachers are not telling you how to vote. Level 3. People are getting more serious about what they perceive to be the sorry condition of our culture, and they say, we need to do something about this. It needs to be direct. It needs to be intentional. We need to stand up for Jesus, whether it be about abortion or matters of LGBT or whatever it is. We need to stand up and do something about it because Satan has taken over this world. Now, I want to remind you that the church has done very well in the past whenever the government has persecuted them. I want to remind you that in the past, the church has grown well in periods of persecution. Look at Revelation 2 and verse 10. I want to remind you that Jesus said, the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. The Supreme Court will never determine the future of the church. Why? It is in the hands of God and we. It is in our hands. And therefore, regardless of how ticked off you might get, the point is that Jesus is always going to trump whatever court there is. Now, with regard to that then, should I get politically active? But the more politically active I get, the more it distracts me from my ministry, which is doing things like 12 questions, taking questions from the community, trying to bring people to the Lord, building relationships with Jesus, etc. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, am I supposed to be politically active in other ways? I wouldn't necessarily say that it's wrong, but it certainly is easy to distract you. I call it the kidney stone effect. Kidney stones ain't real big, but they will certainly get your attention. Okay, and so whenever you get a kidney stone, they act like they weigh about 12 pounds and they got spikes on them. All right, so whenever a person says, how you doing? Well, I'm fine, except I got kidney stones. You know that man is a liar. Okay, because there's no such thing as a kidney stone that is stuck and your attention is not directed toward that. All right, so it will maybe focus the direction of the church. In other words, rather than saying, this is what my ministry is, let's see if we can clarify and focus what our ministry actually is and stop asking the government to do what we are supposed to be doing anyway. And a fourth possibility is during the Middle Ages, there was no king or no queen who could ever reign on his or her throne without the approval of the dominant church of that day. In other words, this is direct and intentional official power. My belief still is rotating somewhere about number 2. I think that it's fine for you to be politically active if you want to, but I think it's also important to remember that your job is your job. I think there are some things. Here's a little book I could recommend to you. It's free, Protecting Your Ministry. If you want to know about how some of these matters might affect you, then you can go find this on On the website, if you can't find it under Protecting Your Ministry, I believe Dr. Denny Burke at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary has made it available on his website at dennyburk.org, dennyburk.org, and you can get this. But there are some things that we can do to make sure that we comply as best we can with the laws of our beautiful country, even when we disagree in matters like this. Now, in view of Romans 13, do we ever have to be civilly disobedient? Maybe, but you don't have to be looking for that occasion to come. In other words, there might come a time where a person would say to you, here's the governor of Texas last week speaking, saying, I don't care what the Supreme Court says, here's what we're doing in Texas. Okay, all right, so it could very well be that occasion might arise. If someone tries to tell me whom I can officiate a marriage for and whom I must officiate a marriage for, then I tell you there's going to be some sparks flying. Because I don't want the government telling me whom I have to officiate marriages for as a minister, because I happen to think it's really none of their business. On the other hand, if I have to be civilly disobedient in order to do that, it might be that there will be some trouble. Right now there's a case in Connecticut or New Hampshire where a minister has officially been sentenced to 1 year because he refused to say such a ceremony. I think that'll get thrown out of court, but on the other hand, it makes you wonder. So, what are the circumstances for civil disobedience in the world in which we find ourselves? How much time do I have, Tim? All right, let's go over it quickly. Peter and John practiced civil disobedience when they disobeyed Jewish authorities and continued preaching in the name of Jesus. Jesus clearly taught that we should try to do everything that we can legally according to the laws of the land. Paul taught this in Romans 13, 1 through 7. And therefore what we find ourselves being is in this situation. Do not anticipate breaking the laws of the land. Try to find a way to obey every law of the land if you are a Christian, because that's what we do. We are not known to be lawbreakers. If we are put into a corner where a choice has to be made, make sure there are no other options. And then finally, ask yourself 3 questions. If you want to get involved in politics, do you view this as being as important as being in the church and doing your work in the church? And if you do, you're thinking wrong. Because the church is always first. Matthew 6:33. Number 2, do you think that somehow or another going to the courthouse is the same as the spiritual struggle that we all face? Well, it may be, but the spiritual struggle that we all face is because of the power of Satan, and all of us have to deal with the onslaughts that he sends our way. And number 3, there should be no immoral action that is done just because I am a state representative or whatever else, just because I'm in politics. You might recall that our president, Garfield, was told by David Lipscomb that he ought to go to church. And Brother Garfield was a member of the Church of Christ, but when he became president, he stopped going. Brother Lipscomb would have nothing to do with that. He said, I don't care who you are, go to church. Now, I think that is true insofar as, I wouldn't take it as far as Lipscomb did, encouraging people not to vote. But I would say, you got to remember that God is always first. So is this country God's chosen nation? No more than any other country on earth. Do we have spiritual opportunities that other nations don't have? And therefore, will we be held accountable someday if we do not take advantage of these opportunities? I think we will. So I love my country. But if I sing God Bless America, I could just as easily sing God Bless Greece, or God Bless Ethiopia, or God Bless any other country. All right, we'll take a few minutes now and then have some questions.
How did you become so powerful?
If I could ask God one question, I would ask Him, when's Jesus coming back?
If you could ask God one question, what would it be?
Why the donkey makes a hee-haw sound?
Why did God make sharks and alligators, but I know what pinches a crab?
God, how big are you?
We are at 12 Questions Memphis here at the Great Oaks Church of Christ. We're here with Dr. Ralph. We've been scanning your questions that you've been sending in. Continue to do that. We've got a lot of questions this session. I think some very good ones and interesting ideas and questions that you've come up with. So continue to ask those. Dr. Ralph, should a Christian recite the Pledge of Allegiance? Can he serve two masters?
Well, the way the question is phrased is, I think, the problem. Again, it's like the question that the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind. Built in there is the idea somehow or another that if I say a pledge of allegiance, that means I intend for that allegiance to supersede my first allegiance. I pledged allegiance to my wife when I married her. She pledged allegiance to me when she married me. It went something like this. Do you promise to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only to her so long as you both shall live? That's what allegiance is. So just because I pledge allegiance to a certain civil group or to a certain company or to a spouse does not mean that I mean for that to override my allegiance to God. So I wouldn't ask a person to violate their own conscience on that, but I think that the way that it's set up is kind of like a false dilemma. Because I do have a number of things in my life that I owe allegiance to besides my country and besides God. But God is always first.
How can a Christian who serves in some capacity in the government or military know that the actions taken by the country are according to the will of God? If they cannot know, how can they serve in that capacity?
Well, that's a tough question. Of course, I love the military. I would like to direct the Inquisitor to Romans 12, 17 through 21, and then Romans 13, 1 through 7. Notice that a lot of people had questions for Paul about this. If you were under the reign of Nero, who was the most wicked perhaps in that period of time, the most wicked emperor in that, or Caesar in that period of time, it would be easy to say, I am not paying a penny to Nero's government. But what Paul does say is, hey, God's still in charge here, and you're supposed to pay taxes. You owe no one anything except to love one another, and you go ahead and do this. So Romans 12 is about my personal relationship. I should not be a vigilante. I should not go around trying to pick a fight. I should not be a person who roams the neighborhood trying to find somebody to shoot. I should not be that sort of person. I should do what Jesus says about the cheek, right cheek, left cheek. Man compels you to go with him in Matthew 5, go with him 2. Go 1 mile, go with him 2. Or if a man sues you for your outer cloak, give him your inner cloak as well. Paul puts it in these words with regard to Romans 12, where he says, you shall heap coals of fire on his head by being this good person. So as an individual, I don't have a right to be in the military and to have those sorts of rights. But what if I am put in charge of a job like that by the government? Can I serve in such a way that I can both honor God and do the job that I'm expected to do? A lot of people who think they are pacifists remember 3 numbers when they're in trouble. 911. They think, oh, I'm a pacifist here. I'm just going to let happen what's going to happen. But by the way, when you come to my house, bring a couple of friends with you, Smith and Wesson. When you come to my house, defend my wife, defend my children. So, I am not hawkish about this, but I do believe that it is possible for people to serve in the military without dishonoring their God. But if the government asks you to do something that would dishonor your God, then you must not do it. Oh, and by the way, none of us, even for those of us who give at Churches of Christ on Sunday, we don't always know that the elders are always going to make the best decisions about how the money is going to be used. But once you give that money, you're not giving it to the elders. You are giving it to God and trusting in God that it will be used the right way. I would think that a similar attitude would be true about the military.
If Christ's kingdom is not of this world, can a Christian try to achieve Christ's purpose through political means?
A Christian may. By the way, the word kingdom is basileia, and that means kingdom, and the word for king is basile. So basile reigns over the basileia. The word kingdom is used in two different senses in the Bible. Jesus said in Luke 17:20 and 21, look among you, the kingdom of God is among you. Generally, the word means the rule or reign of God in your life. Like we sometimes sing the song, over all the earth you reign on high. But the word kingdom may specifically refer to the church, as it does in Matthew 16:18. So what we want to do is look for the rule or reign of God in each of our lives, and we want to do this through the kingdom of God's dear Son. Colossians 1:17. Now, if we do that, what we don't want to do is to intentionally violate the will of the Father. The kingdom is first. Matthew 6:33.
Can Christians hurt the worldwide church by identifying strongly with an earthly, temporary nation?
Yes, they can. At Freed Hardeman, we sometimes, say the Pledge of Allegiance, but then there are international students there who don't know exactly what to do. So here's my suggestion. In whatever country you may be visiting, be respectful to those who are saying allegiance to their country or singing their own national anthem, because you want them to be respectful if you are singing yours. So what we should not do is ask foreign students who are citizens of other countries to swear allegiance to the United States when they are their own citizens. On the other hand, we do expect them to be respectful if we are saying our own Pledge of Allegiance, because in another country, we would want to do the same for them.
What can we do to have a more global concept of church? Church is a global deal.
Well, what we can do is to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. If people can see, I was talking with a medical person last week who is not a believer yet. And I was trying to talk to him about what it was like. It was one of Joyce's doctors last week. And so I said to him, why are you here? And in other words, my wife is really sick with an abdominal blockage, and this American-trained surgeon is in St. Croix during that time. And I asked him, why are you here? Even after he had done the surgery, and Joyce was able to leave on the airplane yesterday, ask him again, why were you here at this time in this place? So it seems to me we could be more global if, first of all, we're more evangelistic. And if we are more evangelistic, wherever we go, we carry the presence and purpose of God in all of our lives. Then hopefully people can see a difference. They will see past provincial lines to things that are really more important. So it starts, I think, Colton, from the inside out.
Should a Christian enter an elected office, and do we need more Christians in government?
Well, I think that we could use more Christians in government. I think that's kind of apparent.
Yeah.
We could use more Christians. We could use more Christians in government. I would never say that, but I would also say that whenever you represent a a constituency. It is easy to give in to a constituency if indeed that's where the cultural pull is taking you. For instance, right now it's very difficult for some of our elected officials to come out and say, no, I can't go there. Because you get charged with hate speech, or you get charged with certain phobias if you go in that direction. So it's not wrong, Colton. I do think that we could use more Christians in government. But on the other hand, we should not ever replace the idea of the kingdom growing from the inside out with the idea of somehow or another the government's going to do our evangelism for us. In the past, that has never worked well. It has never worked well to let the state try to do what we're supposed to be doing. What we're supposed to be doing is trying to take the message of Jesus and changing people from the inside out, and then that naturally will cause some changes in our culture.
Do you think it will someday be as dangerous to be a Christian as in the U.S. as it was to be one in Russia? And what do we do with our fears about the direction our country is taking?
Well, I'm not a gloom and doom sort of person. There's a lot of gloom and doom on the internet. It makes you want to slap some people around. You know, and because it's just like, oh yeah, what's God going to do now? And I'm talking about it in a figurative sense, of course. But I get tired of reading Facebook of all the naysayers who are out there, and the world is coming to an end, the sky is falling, and all of that. I am not convinced of that. I think there are still a lot of good people in government. I think that there are people who will not put up with the death of religious freedom. They will not put up with it. There are people passing, for instance, pastor protection laws in various states now, saying, if you're put into a situation that you need to make a tough choice, we got you covered. Now, is it going to be a tough period of time? Yes. Political correctness is about to kill a lot of approaches, and even now, as I'm speaking on the internet, it's difficult to make sure that what you're saying can't be interpreted in more than one way, because there's people out there who wish to do ill or harm to the kingdom of God. I am convinced of that. And I'm convinced that Satan is behind a lot of this. But I still remain optimistic, because God is still God, Christ is still Christ, and the Spirit is still the Spirit. His church is still the church.
Last question.
Yep.
Would Jesus be patriotic?
Jesus would take a coin out of a fish's mouth, and he would say, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar's, but you better make sure that you give God what belongs to him.
All right. We're done with this session, this 8 o'clock session on nationality, and does God choose one nation over another nation. If you want to join us at 10 o'clock, we'll be back here. We'll be online at 10. We're going to be talking about would a loving God really allow people to suffer in hell. So we're going to be discussing some of those issues. So join us at 10. These are also going to be archived online, so if you don't get to the live stream, come back and look at these sessions. Dr. Ralph is going to be back with us. We are here at Great Oaks. We're going to be having these sessions every night at Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, 7, 8, and 10. So come back and join us. Thank you for being here.